I'm pretty excited to be standing here in London and speaking about my first love, Sherlock Holmes. Let me tell you how I first met him. And in order to do that, I will have to take you first to Italy, to Milan, where I grew up as a child. Now, Italy is a very special place in many ways. One of them is that in Italy, the brightest kids are not wasted on subjects like math or economics or English. The really bright ones are sent to Liceo Classico to study practical things like philosophy, Latin, and ancient Greek. Well, when I was around 11 years old, following this classic Italian route, my spiritual mother, today I believe it's called mentor, Anna Picardi, gave me this book. And in doing so, changed my course for good. During that entire summer, I read all there was to read about Holmes. I dreamt about visiting 221B Baker Street, his home, here in my beloved London. And Sherlock's famous silhouette hung over my bed throughout my teenager years. It's true. I mean, Holmes didn't fly like Superman and wasn't big and strong like the Hulk. But to me, he was a far more powerful superhero than they ever will be. To be able to observe chaotic trifles that other people ignored, and based on what he called the science of deduction, being able to reconstruct past events and predict future behavior is one hell of a superpower. Even today, especially today, in this hyper-technological age where AI and big data are reshaping our lives, I often hear his famous word pounding in my head. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and it is my business to know what other people do not know. Does this sound familiar to any of you? Isn't that exactly what Google and Facebook are doing? The groundbreaking technologies of today are indeed based on light-speed analysis of piles of trifles we now call data, turning them into valuable insight and predicting future events, just like he did 150 years ago. And now, after briefly touching on these cliffs of intellect, let's land back to our petty and sweaty reality and talk about us, humans, and specifically a special type of humans, Israelis. Take a happy Israeli and tell him you bought the same car but paid $5,000 less and you made a grown man cry. Well, today, governments worldwide are waking up feeling exactly that nasty feeling when they are realizing that they are unable to seize the value embedded in data generated by their own users. And they are getting really, really angry. Imagine Saudi Arabia would not make a single dollar of its oil. Imagine Brazil would not make money off its excellent coffee. I think we got it by now. It's 12:30. Data is the new gold. Fact of the matter is that due to the rapid pace of technology, the concept of value is constantly changing, and the fiscal system have difficulties adapting in real time. The UK, France, and Italy, to name just a few, are fighting their way to get back something back to the residents, who in turn keep their heads stuck on their smartphone screen, adding more and more wood to the bonfire of data. To further illustrate, let's assume a French vineyard. It is very clear to us that the value, namely the fine bottle of wine, is produced in France. And it is very intuitive that Monsieur Macron should have the exclusive right to tax such value. So why should Facebook be different, asks Trump. Why should I give the French a piece of my profit? Why should the French bite my donut? Well, your donut, replies back Macron, would be an oily pile of dough without our data. Just like cooking risotto Milanese without saffron. Whoever tasted it knows exactly what I'm talking about. And if you didn't, shame on you. And now, after eating fine Italian food and drinking exquisite French wine, and a moment before a trade war is being waged between the two sides of the Atlantic, would be a good time to introduce Monsieur Pascal Saint-Amand, who may very well save us from all this. I never met Pascal Saint-Amand, who heads the Center of Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD. But I'm pretty sure he's not as eccentric and arrogant like my Sherlock. I know he's based in Paris, and I know he has a degree in history, which probably explain his deep understanding of the power of consensus and how he managed to lead, in a remarkably peaceful way, a real revolution in the last 7 years. For the time being, let's call it the fair share revolution. With no guillotines or army, Pascal and his team have managed to change not only the way the pie is divided, but also the narrative. Ever since the new era of hard globalization began around 30 years ago, we have witnessed a game of chess played by two large, sophisticated players. On one hand, the governments of the West, bureaucratic and heavy. On the other hand, global conglomerates, agile, efficient, and fast. I'm afraid we can all imagine who won. I have been dealing with international tax for the last 2 decades. For years, this was the norm. Multinational were legally subject to single-digit tax rate and were bragging about it. But then came the 2008 crisis and a deep loss of trust. The subsequent social rage began channeling into the social platform. The G8 and G20 had no choice but to react to the rolling snowball, passing the hot potato to what they conceived is a toothless international organization. I clearly remember the skepticism hanging in the air in 2013 when the OECD first released the BEPS initiative. I also remember the clear gut feeling I had that this time it's really happening. And so it was. The OECD has proved itself to be an organization that can reach global consensus about extremely controversial issues and has managed to implement these new norms using old-school social pressure technique like blacklisting and shaming. And today, the OECD possesses something that no algorithm can produce. This something is called trust. And trust is not something to underestimate. Therefore, now, it's not a question of if the basic rules of how the pie is divided will change again, but of how. I assume we are coming to a close of this brief discussion, and at least some of you are sitting here and saying, this all may be very interesting for Google and Facebook, but it's irrelevant for me. Well, I have news for you. If your business can scale without mass, if your users are spread globally, if your users are not necessarily your paying clients, if your business makes significant marketing investment globally, and if your valuation is closely linked to your users, then your business is in the heart of this new reform that is about to kick in. And I suggest you stay tuned, because toward the middle of 2020, the OECD is going to release this new world order. To me, building a consensus and changing the rules and norms in over 100 countries without firing one shot is, again, one hell of a superpower. And if one man with a computer-like brain was a superhero in the Victorian era, isn't it appropriate for us to choose for the 21st century a hero with the powers to drive countries to reshuffle their cards? Thank you very much.